It was 13 short months ago, an innocuous tweet from the head of a Silicon Valley nonprofit launching something called ChatGPT. But within 5 days, more than 1 million people had taken up Sam Altman's offer and tried out the new baby of OpenAI. Out were decades of grappling over the theoretical dangers of powerful artificial intelligence systems. In a race to corner the market, with the parent companies of rivals Google and Facebook scrambling to match Microsoft's $13 billion investment. High-stakes drama ensued with the firing and rehiring of Altman. At the heart of that Silicon Valley soap opera, the bigger question: will 2023 prove a tipping point for humanity? If so, for better or for worse? Will artificial intelligence save lives or destroy them, ensure new livelihoods, or make us all redundant? We're still grappling with the implications of the digital age, an age of online dating and algorithms that draw us into a virtual world that caters to our tastes. Have machines already altered the way we think? As humans, are we more plugged in or more alienated than before? And what happens after 2023 and the year the AI genie was let out of the bottle? Today, in a special edition of the France 24 debate, we're asking, is it a turning point for humanity? With us, Raja Chatila, director of the Institute of Intelligent Systems and Robotics at Paris's Pierre and Marie Curie University. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
All right, not so bad. From New York City, Leila Morch, CEO of Internet Governance and Content Moderation Advisors, Gemini. Thanks for being with us.
I'm more than welcome.
From Washington, D.C., best-selling science fiction author Victor Dixon. Your novels include Cogito, about an 18-year-old who's tempted by a Faustian pact to undergo a treatment to turn her into a genius. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And Chris O'Brien, editor of the French Tech Journal. How's your 2023 been?
Interesting. Never boring.
Never boring indeed. Throughout the year, you can react on the hashtag F24debate. Full disclosure, the real reason for this show is to determine just how expendable we are in the newsroom.
Hello, and welcome to Channel One, a new way of consuming, reporting, and thinking about the news.
This is channel1.ai. None of the people, graphs, footage that you see are real. It's all computer generated.
Maybe you hear the words artificial intelligence and you're immediately skeptical or concerned about technology gone crazy. But everything you'll see on Channel One relies on trusted sources and fact-checking.
Raja Chatila, what can possibly go wrong?
Everything can go wrong. You're never sure.
I'm asking for Chris here.
Well, what can go wrong? I mean, you know, when you use technology which is in its years of development, it's not mature enough, and safeguards are not fully in place. So things can go wrong, and they already have done, actually.
A few years back, Chris O'Brien, you remember Yahoo tried to have these computer-generated news articles. It didn't work. Is it the same with AI?
No, not now, I think. You know, I've seen a similar evolution in this domain. I previously worked at the Los Angeles Times in California for a couple of years, and they had developed a system where an earthquake sort of AI-generated news story where they was plugged into the earthquake system, the national alert system. When an earthquake happened, it produced a story, right, live onto the site with the basic details of what had happened, the impact of it, just very basic details instantly. And all these systems have evolved rapidly. I think Reuters has used some of this stuff in a very basic system. So, you know, today what we have is 1,000 times more powerful than that. And so I think the cat is out of the bag.
Are you worried or amused when you see that AI-generated news bulletin?
Both, because, you know, I have the sense that this stuff is not just accelerating, but accelerating exponentially. And I'll just give you one example. So I write a newsletter. Someone who's doing an AI-generated podcasting platform contacted me saying, we'd like to produce a podcast for you. Send them the article, they put it into the machine. It produced a 9-minute podcast that included the information in the article, but a much more vast amount of information and sources. The reader, the AI-generated reader, to my ear, sounded 100% natural. If I put this on Spotify and you listen to it, you could not distinguish that this was not a machine. This was a machine reading this, not a human. And so I was listening to this both amazed that they had generated this in about 2 minutes and horrified to think, what does this mean for the rest of our industry for, the next decade?
Leila Morch, is it out of control?
Oh, wow. That's a bold question. Out of control, I mean, of course not. Like, we are the one building it. We are the one filling it with energy. At the end of the day, they are, like cable, they are algorithm. So they're not out of control. And so far, until we find a way to have, eternal production of energy to feed those big baby that are the generative AI models, they will never be out of control. The question is, how do we make the control sustainable, and how can we keep a sense of control? What I'm trying to say is, the fact that the AI is not out of control in the science fiction sense, I'd say. What's out of control is the understanding we have of them, the understanding of the impact, and the way we focus on what should matter and what should not matter. So I'd say it's been out of control for a while now, and we could mention writers, people talking about that actually like almost a century ago, already writing. You can think about Brave New World, for example, this amazing book. He was saying what would be out of control, and it was not that much related to AI, but rather on how society organizes themselves through technology. So I'd say no, but I'd say it's out of control in the sense that it's been for years.
Well, there's two fears, right, Leila? One fear is the one you just described, and is spelled out in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, of technology used to control people through totalitarian systems. But the other fear is that we program computers that become more powerful and can override what humans order them to do.
So I'd say that in a sense, you're now referring to The Matrix, this absolutely amazing movie that questions us on what kind of future do we want. And again, will that happen? Will that not happen? Who knows? Will we ever have the energy to let that happen?
Was 2023 a tipping point?
I'd say from the technology background, no, it wasn't. Those models were already existing. What is the tipping point for me is the impact of those tools on society. So technology didn't change. The way we use it and the spread of the technology radically changed. And that's where I'm getting more and more worried, because the technology is moving fast, but what really changed is our capacity to use it without the education, without the critical thinking to be taught to us, to our children, to our old person. That's what really worries me. So yeah, 2023 is a turning point, not from a tech standpoint, but from a democratical standpoint.
Yeah, in 2023, France 24 put out a documentary about facial recognition, which you can see on our website. Not in China, but in Europe and in the United States. In the 2002 Steven Spielberg film, Minority Report, computers in a dystopian future have the power to decide when to preventively arrest people before they commit a crime. Victor Dixon, again, I'll put the same question I put to Leila Morch. Has 2023 been a tipping point in what we ask machines to do and how far they go in doing it?
Well, I think it has been a tipping point in the public for sure. There is an awareness that AI is disrupting our lives and disrupting society with ChatGPT and other open AI that is made available to the public. If I take the field of literary creation, there is one very specific example. For instance, the ecosystem of science fiction in the US is that aspiring writers would write short stories that they would send to magazines. There are a lot of science fiction magazines in the US. then they would get first published with the short story, be spotted by a big publisher, and maybe move on to a novel. The fact is that the main magazines in science fiction in the US have been overflooded by short stories generated by AI. So some of them have closed the submissions. So this is a route that is not open anymore to aspiring writers. So AI, in a way, is replacing artistic human creation in a very concrete way in the field of
Victor,
science
let me
fiction.
ask you, have you, because it's kind of similar to what we just heard from Chris O'Brien. Have you read some of these short stories? Are they good?
I read them. I can still find that the style, the plotting is not exactly to the level of what a human being could do. That being said, if we look back at the pace of improvement of AI, I have no doubt that 1 year down the road, 2 years down the road, the level will be pretty similar. And we see the same in visual arts, with Midjourney, for instance. If you look at Midjourney's productions, like from last year, they seem very primitive if you compare to what Midjourney is able to do in the field of visual arts today.
Right, and so there is this question of what happens next. To think that a quarter century ago, what scares a lot of people is just how fast it's going. A quarter century ago, we fretted when the IBM computer Big Blue came close to beating then world chess champion Garry Kasparov. The launch of ChatGPT suddenly making Google's almighty search engine seem, well, quaint. And although the launch was low-key, its creator's ambitions are anything but modest. Back in May, when he testified before the US Congress, Sam Altman compared his new baby to Gutenberg's revolutionary 15th century invention of a machine that prints books.
We're here because people love this technology. We think it can be a printing press moment. We have to work together to make it so.
We have to work together to make it so. Is it a printing press moment, Raja Shatina?
No, I don't believe so. The printing press is really a game changer. Although of course, the adoption wasn't at the same pace. What is a game changer is in 2023 is the massive adoption by people, by ordinary people, of an AI system. It's, in my opinion, the first time that people had the opportunity to directly interact and knowingly with an AI system, and not just interact in natural language, which is our main means to interact together as humans. And I think the perception of what an AI system is have changed in the public because of that. So that's the main change in 2023. ChatGPT have been released in 30 November 2022. So this happened in 2023, and more similar systems are being developed, deployed. So this is increasing. Yes, we have now a tool that can be used by anyone to produce text, to answer questions. And that's another point, which is the reliability of these systems, because they are able to provide untrue facts in their answers. And therefore, you don't know where the truth is. And this is what I fear with this channel you mentioned, which is powered by AI systems. There is no way to immediately check if what they produce is true or false.
Right. We have at a much low-grade level, we have tools like Wikipedia, which are what's called open source. Anybody can go in, check, you look at the references. OpenAI is not open source. If it was open source, would it make it better?
Yes and no, because it's not enough. I mean, open source means, yes, you have some transparency and anyone has access to the software. But here we are speaking about models which have, you can disclose some information about the models. This is what open source do, a number of parameters, the way they were built. But the model in itself, which is the the statistical mix of data that has been processed by the learning system, this is not transparent. This cannot be transparent on its own. So when you interact with the system, you still don't know if the answer is correct or not, partially correct, fully correct. It sounds correct. It looks correct, but you don't know. Yeah. So you see, if you ask it specific questions, it might. I did this. I'm doing this every day, actually. And if you ask it, for example, of something about your own CV, it may provide the answers that are correct and answers that are wrong at the same time in the same text. You know the difference because it's about you, but I don't know. So I will start thinking things about you, believing things about you which are not true. And I see this as a major point.
Makes disinformation much easier.
Yes, absolutely.
There's a French generative AI company called Mistral. It's just achieved unicorn status. That means it's gotten a lot of funding. It wants to be open source. Will that work, Chris O'Brien?
Well, I would just echo what you were just saying. There's pros and cons there. Part of the risk is you're basically saying we're not going to worry in advance about fixing all these problems, putting the safeguards in place. We're going to release this, and we're going to count on the community to at least have some level of transparency into it, to find the flaws, to notice the flaws, to fix them, to alert us to it. And so we're leaning on this big community of people. But that said, you're putting it out there in a more raw form versus, and this is where it'll get confusing, the company called OpenAI, which is not OpenAI, will say, okay, we're going to put in moderation.
Which is closed circuit AI is what you're saying.
Right. We're going to moderate that, review it, try to eliminate the risks before we put it out into the public. And open source AI is dangerous because you're putting it out there without sufficient safeguards in advance. So that's the debate. Now, the company OpenAI, when they put their private AI out into the world, there's still even less transparency into the underlying code, the algorithms, et cetera. So this is the dilemma we're all facing. Which is the better, which is the safer system? They both have their pros and cons. Obviously, Europe in a very big way and France in a very big way is betting that the open source AI is the more ethical, safer path toward developing this.
Right, and that's even something that's been put forth already for regulation. Implications of publicly available artificial intelligence tools are such the European Union reaching a deal just before the end of the year on the world's first AI regulation. Siobhan Silk has the story.
The exponential advance of artificial intelligence technology has left governments scrambling to keep up. Now, after marathon negotiations, the European Union has laid down the world's first comprehensive rules on AI systems, rules MEPs say should be used as a model for other governments grappling with the issue.
I think as AI is becoming so omnipresent in our lives, so omnipresent in our economies, the whole world, for the last year in particular, has been wondering what to do about it. We did deliver a balance between protection and innovation.
The strictest of the rules will apply to AI systems that are considered high risk because of their potential to harm fundamental rights like health, safety and democracy. MEPs wanted a full ban on AI-powered facial scanning and other remote biometric ID systems. But national governments argued for exceptions to allow police to use the technology to search for victims, investigate serious crime or respond to terrorist threats. Negotiators agreed that compromise, but put restrictions on predictive policing, the use of AI to predetermine who might commit a crime. There'll also be a total ban on AI-powered emotion recognition in the workplace and schools, social scoring, and systems designed to manipulate human behaviour.
We have worked together to have a regulation that respects human rights in the digital age and that guarantees the ethics and the values that we defend in Europe. This is a very well-balanced regulation that boosts innovation and that makes compatible innovation with the defence of fundamental rights.
The legislation will also regulate generative AI systems like ChatGPT or Midjourney, which create new content based on vast amounts of scraped data. They're already being used for disinformation and have sparked fears of job displacement. They weren't even released when the first draft of the legislation was written in 2021, an illustration of how fast governments have to work to respond to the looming AI tidal wave.
Leila Morch, the big criticism of regulators is it's difficult to make rules for something that's so new that you don't quite understand it yet. How did the EU do with this bill?
First, I would like to underline the fact that when he was saying we have to work together to make it so, talking about OpenAI becoming a bit about, the new in-memory system. For me, it highlights really the discussion that has on one hand, the technologist builder who say, this is the way technology is going, and we have to work to make sure that it becomes the new big invention. And regulation like the AI Act would try to stand up and say, actually, we want to have critical thinking. We have to have an eye on what you are building before releasing it widely. So I'd say for me, the politicians and the regulatory ecosystem try to really act as they should be in responsibility for shaping where technology is supposed to go. And I would like to highlight the fact that Neil Postman, in his book Technopoly, when he was talking about the surrender of culture to technology, was highlighting that the risk of technology becoming an unquestioned force in society. For me, what the AI Act is doing, and it's only the beginning, and I'm not saying that they're doing everything right, but they start questioning this force that AI is, releasing to the public. And what they try to work on and what they should really keep working on is the question of accountability. Now, coming back to the accountability and explainability. Now, coming back to the point you raised about regulating something that is that new, I'd say that for me, we are doing it the wrong way. And I might actually just raise a comment about that. We have in France a law called bioethical law that comes back in front of the parliament every 7 years. It's basically how science, especially medicine, can do or cannot do things according to the evolution of our culture, of our society. And it's basically matching what we allow and don't allow to the evolution of societies. I do believe that the best way to regulate AI, but any kind of tool that we come up with this kind of frenetical path, should be in a kind of big law that would be changed every 7 years. Because if we start to have one data act on one hand, and then the DSA, and then the AI Act, and sometimes they might not respond well together, sometimes they might contradict each other, we will start to have not only a Far West in tech, but also a Far West in regulation. So I'd say that to keep up the pace with how fast it goes, we should really try to have policy people first to engage with people who are hands-on building the tech, and not only from those big new giant companies that are OpenAI and hopefully Mistral AI soon.
And on that point, Leila, can you reassure or not Raja Shatila earlier when he was talking about how to the naked eye, the stuff that's put out, we don't know that it's AI. This new European bill, it's going to call for labeling of things that are AI. Is it going to work that?
Honestly, I don't know. And I think it's going to depend on how this law will be interpreted and the kind of tool that we'll make available for that. But to that, I hope it's going to work. But as he was saying, things are moving so fast, and the law is trying to grasp something. For me, we should focus more on how we want society to react to that, and how we want to label the risk, and how we want to make it explainable. But I don't think we can control it the old school way, I'd say.
You sound fatalistic about it.
I mean, just look at the track record. Have we ever stopped something from happening? The only time it happened was with Dolly. Remember that ship that we didn't want to see clone? That's the only time maybe in the science history we stopped something. Unless we have a community gathering behind this question of ethics, and it all comes back to ethics, and that's why I was mentioning bioethical law. We won't have the capacity to question what we want or what we don't want, because the tech space is moving and they actually don't really care. So I'm a bit fatalistic, because unless we start to think as a society of where we want to go, unless we start giving people's vision, political vision of what is the space tech should have in our life, What is the space tech should have in our brains? Unless we have those democratical debates, it will only stay in a space where people feel like they are disarmed, they are not emperors for that. And so we will only keep this discussion among elites, and people will be at the end of the food chain in a sense. So yeah, I'm fatalistic unless we actually create debates about not what is AI, but what is a society we want tomorrow. And this is why, for me, science fiction is so important, because science fiction gives us choice.
Victor Dixon, you agree?
Agree with what was just said. You know, for me as a science fiction writer, my work, my job is to put things in context and try to invent possible futures, to make stories with which readers will be able to figure out complex technologies and I think that the future has never been so fast as today because of technological innovation. I would like to go back to the comparison with Gutenberg and the print invention. For me, there is a difference between the printing, which is replicating ideas, and generative AI that can create new ideas. So it's almost an anthropological rupture, disruption.
So hang on a second, Victor. Raja Shatila was saying that actually AI is not as big a deal as the printing press. You're saying it's a bigger deal.
I think it is. For me, it's the fourth industrial revolution. The first one was the coal in the 19th century. Then we had electricity in the early 20th century, computer science in the 70s. This one is the fourth industrial revolution. I think it's going to disrupt our way to see the world. And also, you know, when I started to write Cogito, my novel, it started with a sociological report I read saying that 30 years down the road, 80 to 90% of the jobs that exist today will be replaced by AI, will be automatized. So I told myself this should be at the very center of the democratical debates. To go back to what Leila was saying, we have to debate these huge technological innovations. But nobody was talking so much about AI and its implications at the time. So I told myself I have to try to imagine a world where AI would be everywhere and where the job market will be entirely disrupted, where humans would be made helpless and valueless because of AI.
Let me just on that point. Something that was said in the report, and as I'm asking you because you're the science fiction writer, you're the creative content producer. When it comes to regulation, there is a precedent because we're now seeing all the lawsuits that have been filed against Google from people who realize that, been nearly a quarter century now, it's made billions by what's called scraping data, by taking things that were out there in the public domain or not even in the public domain for which they did not pay royalties. And that has built up the strength of their search engine. Would you say that today, because we're aware of that precedent, that regulators will do a better job?
Well, we can hope for that. But as Laila was saying, you know, we are always running after the technological innovation because it goes so fast. And there is a need for regulators to understand as well as possible the technology in order to regulate it. A point that Raja Shatila was raising, I think is very true, is that AI should always disclose itself. It's the first step to understand what is produced by AI and what is produced by human beings, and maybe keep the very concept of the truth. I think what is at risk here is the concept of the truth that is the basis of democracy. With so much content being generated by AI, there is a real risk, in my opinion, that truth entirely disappears. Everyone will have their own truth fed to them by algorithm and by AI. So if we start with asking AI through regulation to disclose itself, to say what content is produced by AI and what content is produced by real journalists, for instance, that's the first step.
But there is right now a tech race going on over in California with Microsoft first out of the starting blocks. Its rivals want to catch up fast. Earlier this month, Google unveiling its answer to ChatGPT-4. It's called Gemini, spelled differently from Leila Morch's outfit. It generates a sound, video, boosts its chatbot Bard. Talking up its powers and its responsibilities is the boss.
We're also deeply investing in AI responsibility. This includes having the tools to identify synthetically generated content whenever you encounter it.
Chris O'Brien, do we take Sundar Pichai at face value, what he's saying? Do you believe him?
Well, I think we've learned never to take these things at face value after a couple decades of this. So I would say no, even if he is well-intentioned. On his side, he may well mean that. I think it's up to us, and I think I'm echoing what others have said here. It's going to be incumbent on us to remain skeptical consumers of this, and that's a challenge again on another level to, questions around media literacy. Are people prepared to really think skeptically about these things? And I think the problem we've seen in the last few years, like if we're going back to the 2016 election, for instance, the vast amount of disinformation and misinformation that flooded our social networks, which now seems quaint by the standards we're talking about today. But we learned that people could develop a low economic model where they hired teams of people in Eastern European countries to generate misinformation, disinformation. They used that to flood social networks, cause division, cause anger around things like vaccines, around politicians.
And is it the same argument on both sides of the Atlantic? Are we grappling with these notions here in Europe, while in America it's the race to who makes the most money out of this?
Well, I don't want to speak for her, but I think I think I'm in agreement with the point Leila was making, which is one thing I appreciate about being in Europe is that there is a more at least willingness to ask the questions. The issue, I think, in Silicon Valley is that as soon as you start posing the questions, or you talk about this, if you want to raise the scenario that Victor raised about the number of jobs being lost, people label you a doomsayer in an attempt to stifle any conversation or thoughtfulness around this. And so I do think even if the European process is imperfect, it could be improved. I do appreciate that people are at least willing to ask some of these existential questions and not just accept or put out there that we have to accept the inevitability of these things, that we have no choice, that we just have to let technological progress overwhelm us and then adapt to it.
Right. Well, here in France, universities like the Political Science Institute Sciences Po have banned students from using ChatGPT for assignments, but elsewhere there's more of a if you can't beat them, join them kind of attitude. Dateline Horsens, Denmark, where an English teacher is preferring to bring AI into the open in her dealings with school students.
If we can have the conversation with them about how to use AI, then the whole idea that they can't talk to us about it because it's forbidden goes away. And whether or not you like this and whether or not you think it's problematic, you have to realize that it is here. And if you drive it underground, then you stop all conversation about it.
Rajesh Shatila, you're not just the director of a robotics system, you're also a man who grades term papers. So let me ask you, how do you handle AI with your students?
Well, I don't forbid it. I explain to them how it works, what it can do, what are the drawbacks. And I ask them if they use it in their, to deliver their homework or their work, they disclose it. They say, I used ChatGPT to do this and this. Be transparent. And then I can judge if they are able to actually use it as a tool or as a replacement of their own creativity.
Are you trying to reassure us here?
No, I'm trying to say that you have this technology available and you should make the best of it by knowingly using it while limiting its negative effects. Actually, you cannot say, hey, look, every day they hear about AI, etc. And then you say, no, you cannot use it. You have to explain how to use it. Education, I think Leila mentioned this before, is key here about how do you use this tool. And it's useful. I mean, I use it myself to search for some issues, to try to find out some ideas actually that I might have, but which can be formulated differently by the system. So it's useful. I'm not saying it's not, but what I mean is, if you want to use it, you have to use it more or less as a specialist than as an end user who ignores everything about what they are asking about.
Victor Dixon, are you reassured listening to Raja Shatila?
Well, yes and no, I have to say. First, we go back to the concept of disclosure. We said AI should disclose itself when it's talking to us, so we know we're talking to a machine. Raja said the same for students who are using AI. They should say that they use the tool. I think it's the same for artists who use AI in their process. That should be disclosed in the work of art. It was produced thanks to AI or with the help of AI. Where I don't totally agree is when we define AI as just a tool. I think it's more than a tool. It's an extension of the self and the mind, or it has the potential to be. You know, already these smartphones, they are an extension of our minds. Our ancestors used to be able to memorize a lot of phone numbers. We don't do that anymore. We have lost this ability because we subcontracted, so to speak, this ability to our smartphones. AI has the potential not only to be an extension of our memory, but also our analytical skills. And I think that is quite a problem when it comes to students who are supposed to form their analytical skills and their judgment on the world. If they rely only on an oracle, almost a mystical oracle like ChatGPT for asking for answers and asking the AI to think for them, then AI will become more than a tool. It will replace our very thought process.
Leila Moore, do you agree?
I don't know if it will. I hope it won't. But I would definitely say that going back to the famous sentence, the medium is the message, and how what we use as a tool can actually alter our perception, our behaviors, and actually our societies, regardless of what we use it for. I'd say yes, we are going that direction. The impact of having personal executive, assistants that they are on our memories, our capacity to seek, our capacity to question ourselves is actually already extremely big. And when we can see that the impact of social media on our capacity to think about a friend. Just to give you a little anecdote, but I think it's extremely important. I'm not on Instagram, and I met someone while I was here in New York, and we were discussing, and he was like, how can we stay in touch, And I was just like, yeah, you can just take my WhatsApp, He was like, yeah, but then how will I, like how will I know that I have to contact you or think about you? I'm just like, yeah, you just contact me when you think about it. Today, people are contacting their friends when they see a picture of them in their feed, like algorithms are actually pushing who we should think about and why. So for me, we have a big lack of critical thinking about that. What I would like to jump on, and because for me, this is really the key point, and this is why the AI Act is not addressing, is the question of trust. For me, those technological tools are kind of like coming right in the middle of maybe the biggest trust crisis our democracies and our societies ever lived through. And when we look up at politicians to actually regulate and make us have the capacity to trust the machine, how can they do that when people don't trust the
them?
regulator?
So who to do it?
Exactly. And so for me, we have to go to philosophers. We have to talk about digital ethics. We have to find ways to provide standards allowing companies to address moral dilemma. And only researchers and philosophers can do that. And we have such a big gap between politicians and the actual researcher. We have only policy people, and them talking, that we have this huge gap. And we need to adapt regulatory framework and governance model to foster public trust, without which digital economics are vulnerable. And trust is not something you can argue about. Trust is about psychology. It's a very emotional phenomenon. We need to start thinking how we can use the technology to actually recreate trust, because I'm also optimistic. I'm fatalistic, but optimistic. I do believe those tools can be used to foster knowledge, to foster accountability of our politicians, of our economics. I do believe in that, but we have to rethink about the fact that this is a human phenomenon, not a tech phenomenon.
Right, and it's definitely the cusp of perhaps, as Victor Dixon was saying, of a new era. When Hollywood actors and writers went on strike this past year, many wondered what artificial intelligence had to do with workers' demands. But with chatbots gobbling up original content without paying copyright or royalties, picketers insisted they're not Luddites. The threat is real, they say. Who were the Luddites? Like the Canuts of Lyon here in France, they were cloth makers, in this case in northern England, who felt sidelined by the Industrial Revolution's new machinery, which they smashed. This arose around the legend of Ned Ludd, a possibly fictitious knitting frame apprentice near Leicester in England, who took a sledgehammer to his boss's machines. Very real was the violence. The government sent in the army to quash unrest. Inspired by the Luddites and the American Revolution, Lord Byron, in his 1816 poem, A Song for the Luddites, wrote, "As the Liberty lads o'er the sea bought their freedom and cheaply with blood, so we boys will die fighting or live free, and down with all kings but King Lud." Of course, this gets back to Leila Morch's point here about the fact that if there's no trust in the authorities, how do you build the trust so we can all agree on the rules? What followed the Luddites was a lot of job losses. People had to reconvert to other jobs. But you also had the rise of a trade union movement. Is there the rise of some new form of a sort of civil society movement that can fill that trust gap that Leila says is missing?
I don't think we've seen it yet. I think it would be great to see that happen. I think it's, those things, again, are not an inevitable course of action. I mean, that requires people to be engaged, to organize, to recognize the stakes, to create a movement around these ideas. That's true whether you're talking about the civil rights movements in the U.S. in the 1960s or any kind of social movement, the one we saw in Eastern Europe in the late 80s.
Let me ask you, 2 centuries on, because you work in tech all day, do you see the Luddites as utopians or who were quaint, or perhaps as agents of a positive change?
Well, I see them really as, for me, again, I'll go back to the point I was saying before. I think they're symbolic of this idea that we have an obligation and an opportunity to pose the larger questions, which is, what is the society that we want? What is the world that we want to create? And I don't think that we have to sit passively by and just accept the inevitability of these creations without asking those questions. And again, that goes back to that sort of dynamic where some people in some corners will look at you just to the very process of asking these questions and say, you're anti-future, you're anti-innovation, you're a Luddite, you're against the future, get out of the way, you're a dinosaur. And I think that's wrong. I think this is our opportunity, with people becoming increasingly engaged, to ask these large existential questions.
Victor Dixon?
Yes. Well, I'm glad we mentioned the Luddites and we put AI in the context of the history of modernity. In my novel Cogito, I imagine that in the future we will have a new type of Luddites that maybe have not arrived yet. And I call them the humanists because they are supremacists of the human race. They want to put humans in front of machines and robots that are everywhere in French society in the future, I imagine. And to the point that there has been a secession between what they call the emancipated zone, a region in France, is Lozère, that was given by the French government to humanicists so that they can have a technology-free zone with no machine, no AI. And of course, it's a very conservative society with a lot of inertia. But maybe it will arrive in this fashion. I don't know, but that's a very possibility that we will have some extremists, anti-AI, anti-machine, who want to destroy robots, as we've seen in the first industrial revolution, because Luddites, they date back to the 19th century and the first industrial revolution. And I would also like to go back to the point that was raised by all the speakers around the table, that we need to put meaning in these like big technological evolutions, like with philosophers that were mentioned by Leila, and science fiction writers also have the task to try to put meaning on this technology that escapes us, that goes so fast that regulators and the public have difficulty to keep track. And producing stories, producing possible future, it's a way to give people the control and for them to ask their representatives to give answers. For instance, when we talk about the potential of AI to replace most of the jobs in the near future, I think a theme like universal revenue, disconnecting wages from the actual work, should be at the very center of the political debate today. It's not the case because politicians, maybe they don't understand the implications or they don't want to. And through science fiction and through the works of philosophers, we can raise these questions and make the public aware so they can ask their representatives for some answers or policies.
All right, as 2023 draws to a close, how we write our stories, how we lowly primates cling to our rituals, and dare we say to our humanity, that's really at the center of it all, like the Vienna Philharmonic's annual New Year's Day concert, where each year the conductor gets the audience to clap in time with Johann Strauss's Radetzky March. Again, do humans have a future, I guess, is the closing question, Raja Shatila.
Well, we develop technology to serve us. We are not at the service of technology. So a lot of people claim very solemnly that they invented a new technology that is going to solve all our problems and make us live better. That's not true. There is no solution in technology alone. I fully agree with what Chris was saying. It's about what future we want to ourselves, to our children. And actually, the AI Act in the European landscape was built with the motive to make AI human-centered. Human-centered means to consider all the issues that relate to human beings and the fact that they have to be protected from any misdoing. So I believe, the issue of trust is that one. It's how do we build the processes to develop these technologies that enable to control it and to use it for the good of humanity. And that's really a major point, and it has many components, including education, including, of course, regulation, including putting in the means to develop systems that can be used with trust.
With trust. Well, let's hope on that note that 2024 is, if I borrow Victor Dixon's phrase, the year we continue to write our own stories, each and every one of us. I want to thank you so much, Raja Shatila. I want to thank as well Chris O'Brien, Leila March for being with us from New York City, Victor Dixon in Washington. Thank you for being with us here for this special edition of the France 24 debate.